All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McKerracher, and today, for this portion of the two-day live stream marathon for the course site launch, we have a very special guest indeed. Please put your virtual imaginative hands together for Dr. Christine Louis Dit-Sully. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's really good to have
I'm a
you.
bit nervous.
A bit nervous. Well, the best compliment I've ever received maybe was the one you gave me after I had you on last time, where you said that you were nervous, but I got you talking, and then you forgot that you were nervous, and then you had a good time. So, no pressure.
Yeah.
But let's see. So that was back in the Theory Plebe days. Now this is the Theory Underground days. And so there's been changes for me, and there's been changes for you as well. Because in a sense, you've written one book. It was published with 0 books, and it was called Transcending Racial Divisions, Will You Stand By Me? And that's what I had originally interviewed you on. And I understand you've in some ways grown away from that text. And so I'll be interested to hear a little bit about that. I'll be interested to really nail down left versus right identity politics and why you're against both and what you basically think real politics is. But before we get into all of that stuff, I guess, would you like to say anything else as a form of introduction for the people who are joining who may have never heard you before?
Yeah, I wrote the book, and I also finished my PhD, I think, after. And now my aim is to be able to understand how to build a humanist and universalist politics. That's my aim. So I am trying to research and to write and put ideas in writing, because it's also help. But my ultimate aim is, as an activist, I suppose, is to build politics around universalism and humanism. So pushing the idea of human beings being important in changing the world, and the idea of universalism. So that's the reason why I have a strong opposition to identity politics, because universalism is you cannot be a universalist and support identity politics. I could discuss later on about the difference between identity and identity politics, because I'm not against people having identities. I'm against the use of identities or social identities in the form of politics, in the political realm. So that's the reason why I try during the book and later on in the thesis, try to understand why is it that I think identity politics is not politics. What's more important in politics that you don't find in identity politics? And for example, am I talking too much?
No, this is perfect. You're doing great.
Okay, so for me, I agree with Anna Arendt when she said that you cannot think about politics without thinking about freedom. And of course, there is different type of freedom and different understanding of freedom. But for me, politics is a human activity where human beings trying to find a way to organize society in a way that would be good for the common good, or at least the majority of the individuals. So you have different theory, different ideology, but you're trying to build the world for human beings, or for your community. And when you have today, for me, it's not politics. It's more of a managerial activity, where you discuss how many taxes you should pay, or how much food, or how much television you should watch. So it's all about managing a society that you have today. And for me, it's nothing to do with politics. And when we have identity politics, what you also have, I think I'm moving in different places, but I'm getting excited and I'm moving all over the place. But for me, identity politics is a way of going away from politics, not looking at how we can organize a better world for all, but how we can fight for the interest of a particular identity in a group. So it could be woman, or it could be black woman, or it could be gay, it could be trans, it could be British, or black British, or French British, or Asian British. But it's always about different identities, a very specific identity, and fighting for the interest of this specific identity. So the notions of fighting for a better society or better world for all, it's gone. The idea of common good is gone. It's all about interest.
Critical question then, just to play devil's advocate, because I think I know the answer, but I want to set you up to be the one talking here. So don't worry, I'll interject if I feel like I can help, but mainly your talking is the goal. But the little devil's advocate thing is, well, what about intersectionality? Doesn't intersectionality put back together all of those identities into one big group that can then fight for justice for all?
I have a problem with intersectionality. It's because intersectionality has no concept, actually, for me, of universalism. What they are arguing basically is that as a Black woman, for example, I'm being identified as a Black woman, and so I should think about the oppressions as a Black and the oppression as a woman. And if I was gay, it would be also the oppressions of a gay. And then you put them together and it's saying my identity is in cross between the oppression of this and the oppressions of this identity. And so basically it's kind of there is something good about, something real about intersectionality, because it's describing what some individuals are living. If you're a Black or if you're a Black woman, as a woman, you have something that is different than if you're a man in sense of equal right. But it's just describing, but it has no sense of let's fight for a world away from identity. It's just basically put different identity and say, how can we make an identity as Black goes with identity as a woman, and go with identity as a British, and go with identity as a professor, and they kind of is as a block. For me, it's very anti-human in a way, because it's basically saying different fixed identity, you put them together and see how it goes well together. And there is no sense of as human beings, as individuals with different identity, we can have a common purpose and a common future and common aim. There is no sense of that, and I think that's, for me, that's a big problem for that.
Yeah, I've found that to be incredibly off-putting, right? Because it's just like, yeah, if your identity doesn't fit into the given ones, then your only role is to listen, support, quote unquote, be a good ally, which means following the right representatives of whatever supposed community, which is usually just some PMC grouping on Twitter, right? Or whoever's like popular on TikTok today, and people say, oh, well, that's just democratic. That's not democratic. I'm sorry, the attention economy doesn't put forth our best. And so I'm very alienated by all of that. And so, my years of organizing with Bernie, or as well as like doing, being a student and teacher in the university system, it just became more and more apparent that this is a genuine issue. And it seemed like, like every time you talk about it or reference some author maybe who's got some criticism, everyone's like, oh, well, that's white. That's a white person. That's just whiteness. And even I know that like the answer would be your critique of, say, the Kimberly Crenshaw approach, the Robin DiAngelo approach, the Kimber X. Kendi approach, the Ta-Nehisi Coates approach. Your critique of it will get one of the responses will just be like, well, you've internalized whiteness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever had someone tell you that to your face, though, in real life?
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a lot of labeling and a lot of insult from both face to face or online, both on different sides. So on the side of Black, in the sense of you're not Black, you're just kind of have an internalized whiteness, and you're not basically a coconut. This is one of the insult that you get as a Black person. And then you have the other side, where basically, if I argue, because I'm also challenging racism, sorry. So if I discuss anti-racism, then I have the other side and say, well, it's because you're Black, that's why you have this point of view. So it's basically, the point is that it's not only, it's the problem with identity. when people are arguing that identity is important, what they're doing at the moment in today's society is that identities are fixed identities. They're putting people into very fixed boxes. There is, even people talk about this is a fluid identity. In fact, when they are trying to define the identity, they don't make it fluid. They make it very fixed, very straight, very hermetic. And if you go away from this idea of what is this identity, then you become a non-black, a non-woman, or a non-gay, just because you have a different point of view. And when you think about identity, it's a bit like racist identity also. But it's what they are saying is that if you have a certain identity, you have to have the culture and the morality and the politics of that specific identity. So when I said I'm not against identity as such, when identity is used in politics, it becomes very strictly fixed. And in fact, they are not identities in the sense, they are classification. Are you part of this category? Are you part of this category? If you have the right opinions, you can be a member. If you have the wrong opinions, you're not a member anymore. So a black person could be what they're calling a white supremacist. It's not irrational to call a black person white supremacist, because what they are saying is that even if you're black as biology black, what they call it biology black, you have the wrong opinion. So you can no longer be part of the black identity. You become a white supremacist. You have lost your identity. And these identities are always fixed and always defined by what I call gatekeepers. So there's groups of individuals in society who are very powerful today. And that's one of the things I'm really challenging, is that those gatekeepers of identity, because politics is only about identity politics, the gatekeepers of identities are very powerful, because they are the one who's saying to you and to everybody else, who is a woman, who is a black, who is British, who is French, who is a professor, who is working class, who is middle class. So they are the ones who are basically fixing their identities, and that if you're a member of that identity, then you can fight for the interests of this identity. So as a professor, you can fight for the interests of the professor. But if you're not a professor, you don't have the right identity to open your mouth about professor's interests. If you're not black, if you don't have the proper black identity, you cannot talk about black identity. If you're not a woman, for example, if you're not considered a woman because you're trans, for example, you cannot talk about woman interests because you're just trans. You see how basically for me it's a mental prison. We are basically pushing ourselves into mental prison.
It's a mental prison, and it seems to also undermine diversity in a more robust sense, because did you see that conversation between Judith Butler, Simon Critchley, and Cornel West when they all three were in dialogue with Glenn Greenwald? No. At one point, because they talk about identity politics, and at one point Judith Butler says, what kind of difference would it have made if we had some black women in this conversation? And then Glenn Greenwald's response was yeah, so we could have Candace Owens in the conversation, or we could have Kimberly Crenshaw. And he starts saying he starts saying the specific kinds of identities that are going to be represented or even asked to join the conversation are obviously going to be heavily determined by the kinds of people who prioritize this kind of representational politics. And I mean, Candace Owens is actually a good example of it. She uses the fact that she's black to be this spokesperson on the right, in the same way that someone like Kimber Max Kendi, uses his blackness as that's his rite of passage, that's his authentic, certification into speaking for this group. And anyway, I just thought, the basic point was Glenn Greenwald goes into it and he says, what about, a working class black woman? What about, what about a black woman who would disagree with you? And I felt Butler was a little slippery and just kind of avoided really engaging with this point. But, to that point, have you been invited since the publication of your book or before? since you've kind of become a public voice on these matters, have you been invited into any institutional spaces to add diversity from the theoretical standpoint to these spaces where they only want to hear from Black women?
No. Well, I mean, maybe, but those kind of things that being invited just because you're a Black woman, people usually don't say it openly. I mean, some of the people will say it openly, but most people will not say, well, because it's kind of an insult. No, we invite you just because you're a Black woman. I mean, I'm most likely going to send them flying if somebody is saying that to me. And my position at the moment is also a little bit particular. The book was received by certain groups of people because it has, like I said, like you said, I moved a little bit. The book was a little bit liberal, and I moved further away from liberal politics. The more radical, because I'm calling myself radical, the more radical I become, the less I can represent a Black woman's point of view. And there is a lot of, for example, when you talk about Black politics in America, there is a few people who are not what we call progressive or right, but they're not heard. The ones who are Black anti-capitalists, for example, are not known. So you have the Black progressive, like Candy, as in the forefront, and then the Black conservative has supposedly the two opposition. Anybody who has what I call radical left, I mean really radicals, are not heard. They're disappeared from the conversation because you had a progressive or a conservative. And for me, I'm neither a progressive nor a conservative. That's the reason why, for example, when I talk about anti-racism to some people, I like going to groups where I know the consensus would be against me. I'm a little bit of a masochist, I suppose. But I like the challenge of going to places where the point of view will be really against me. And the way that they kind of reacting is that just by mentioning anti-racism, I must be a progressive. And then if you go to the progressive, if I mention that I don't support Black identity, then I must be a conservative. And so there is, for me, it's another problem of politics, that there is a very strong restrictions in the framework of the political discussion. So it's very, I mean, for example, what I like about Ken Malik is that he's not a progressive and he's not a conservative. And you can hear him, Ken Malik is an author in public intellectual in Britain. It's somebody
Kevin Malik.
I don't hear you anymore.
Hello?
Oh yeah, I hear you.
Kevin Malik? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Kenan Malik. Kenan Malik. He published just a book recently. It's Not So Black and White: The History of Race. What's his name? What is the?
By Hearst Publishers, yeah. Not So Black and White: A History of Race from White Supremacy to Identity Politics. God,
he's very good.
Okay, I'll pull that up on the screen here so people are able to see it. Have you are you in dialogue with him?
Well, my politics is quite similar to his. I mean, he wrote a book, I think in the 80s or 90s, nothing 90s, the meaning of race, and that was eye-opening. That was, and since that day, I follow him. But for him, he's a left, and he has to struggle to be able to put his point of view away from a conservative, what people call the left, conservative and a progressive. So he's in between, and for me, he's pretty much the same. But his book has been well received, so maybe his voice will be heard. So he's, for example, challenging multiculturalism in the past, but at the same time, he's also a challenge. He's arguing that diversity and migration is a good thing. So you see that there is a very, in the discussions in politics, in racism, the discussion is very restricted.
Right.
And it's very hard to be able to put a voice that is different than the mainstream liberal and the mainstream conservative.
So it sounds like you're using this distinction between liberal and left to say that there's a left that is universalist, humanist, and emancipatory that is not liberal, and that liberal and conservative as the two-party status quo duopolies in the developed world currently exist in, you accept neither of these sides. Now, I know that you've also read at least the first few articles on the Benedict Cryptofash, anti-leftist Marx, or whatever it's called, where he makes the case for a Marx against the term left versus right. And I had Chris Catrone on my channel last year, back in the Theory Plebe days, to talk about this debate, because they actually exchanged articles about this in the Platypus Review. And basically, the standpoint you're ascribing to Malik here sounds like and you're saying that you have similar politics. It sounds like the one that Catrone fundamentally has, as opposed to the one that Cryptofash is advocating, which is, he says that there's no substantial difference between left and liberal, because the leftist academics and activists still function to reify this idea that the liberals are the more progressive side of this duopoly. That's where they speak to. That's the audience they assume. That's the pool from which they recruit. And so even a group that's like revolutionary Marxists, like the IMT in Canada, 500 strong at their conferences, all of them, like, they're not liberal. They still assume kind of liberal progressives are in the college system are going to be their recruitment pool for the continued existence of their institutions. I'm wondering if you, like, how has your thinking kind of in being critical of liberalism, how has your thinking developed in regards to this word left?
I am one of the individuals who is quite sympathetic to Benedict Cryptofash position. I have to say that I avoid too much of this discussion, because I think we can just. I've been in discussing politics for so many years, and the discussions about what the left is, what is the good left, the bad left, the not so good left, the fascist left, and it's just, for me, I found it unproductive. I think that it's more productive to develop ideas that you think is left than just kind of say, well, the left is not very good and this left is better. But I am very sympathetic to Benedict Cryptofash position, because I think that most of what we think is left, especially in America, I'm sorry to say, but most of the people that we think is left are liberal left. They base their politics on a liberal viewpoint, liberal values, and liberal principles. And so even if they call themselves radical, because they are lefty, their politics, it becomes what Cryptofash is arguing, the other side of the conservative. So they are left and the right are what he calls two sides of the same politics. They are bourgeois politics. And in a way, when you look at the left, a lot of the left, for example, have completely, especially today, lost these notions of social transformation or human freedom. So they will, even if the radical left, they will say, well, we want to attack capitalism. So either they will go and say, we don't like capitalism because it's terrible things, all very moralistic, we want people to be happy and to have more food. It becomes a kind of, I'm a do-gooder and you are not, kind of things. So that's why I'm anti-capitalism, because I'm a nice person. Or otherwise, the people will say, well, there is no more important things today is to fight for better wages and better housing, and then there becomes what I call reformist left. So their politics is really much on the short term. Let's go and improve the life of workers within capitalism, and there is no notions of anymore of challenging and opposing and making a society that is different, completely different than capitalism. So they are liberal. And in fact, the anti-racism that you have today, they call it illiberal, but the anti-racism today, identity politics, is liberal anti-racism. It's based on this idea of liberal egalitarian. This is liberal anti-racism.
That right there, I think, kind of gets to the heart of my reason for also saying, yeah, I would prefer to disengage from semantic or gatekeepy type quibbles over words, but the idea of like, well, let's just develop a better left instead of having an argument about who's properly left or whatever. And I understand you're saying that we can't just do that, but I think the danger in defining left like what you think is going to be a movement of the future on the terms of being anti-liberal is that most people I have encountered over 10 years of organizing who hate liberalism tend to hate the best aspects of liberalism while throwing out while celebrating the worst aspects of anti-liberalism from the 20th century. And now, does that inherently make sense, or would you like me to kind of unpack it?
To be anti-liberal, I mean, you have different type of anti-liberalism. So that's, for me, that's because if you're saying anti-liberalism, people should ask, what do you mean by that? Right. So like you said, yes, some people will be anti-liberalism because they would say democracy is not a good thing. Why do you want free speech? Because it is, we are a capitalist society and free speech will be only the powerful have free speech. So those kind of, there is this anti-liberalism, or you have the anti-liberalism of the right, who's arguing that at the end of the day, we want to have a community where the enlightened, basically, are fighting and controlling so that we can fight for the common good. So you can have different type of anti-liberalism. So to just say you're anti-liberal it has nothing. For me, I am anti-liberal and not anti-liberal. I am challenging and I'm thinking that liberalism or liberal way of understanding the world, it's not enough if you think that the best future for humanity is to be able to socially transform from a capitalist society to a society that is based more on human needs and human freedom. For me, I'm basing my point of view on the notions already that I think that we can do better than we have today. So I believe that humanity can do better, and I believe that humanity can change society. Today we have the ability to change society for our own benefits, for our own needs. Instead of having a society that is based on capital, on the regulation of capital and the labor. So I have already this idea that we are, humanity has developed enough that we have the possibility and ability to change consciously a society that we have today to something that can be better. And then I'm thinking, what are those politics that allow me to do that? And if you have a politics who's telling me that we are all individuals, for example, and that we are just, the society is completely forgotten, then you don't even have a sense of the capitalist social order because you're just taking it over. You're just like talking about individuals. We are individuals in, it's like, little boys. We're all together and then we work together and then we separate. And I don't think society, if you think individual like liberal, you're forgetting the social order itself, society itself, that you need to change. So for me, it's that there is liberal ideas that are in fact a barrier to any notions of social transformation or any notions of human emancipation or human development that I'm challenging. So I'm not against free speech, for example. Okay. But for me, I definitely against this idea that somehow free speech used to be there, and then we don't have free speech today. I'm sorry to say, free speech didn't exist before. It has never existed, because you cannot have free speech in a society where you have a dominated class and dominating class.
Right.
The dominating class will not give you the possibility to say what you want, because you want to keep the status quo. So
Right.
black, gay, people outside norms never had free speech. Free speech is an ideal. It's based on the notion that we can have our own point of view. But to say that free speech was good before and now we don't have free speech, I think it's really a way of. I think I'm going all over the place, but it's really, for me, so I can support the free speech as a liberal principle, but I will not, for example, support a free speech campaign just based on free speech, because I think it gives really the wrong notions of what the world is about today.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this is not all over the place. I think you're actually very concise and on point. You're only all over the place for people whose attention spans are less than a tweet, which obviously is TikTok is less than a tweet. So in a sense, people have to develop their attention spans, and people can't say, oh, we need to listen to other people if they only want to have other people in sound bites, because real thinking is syllogistic. It follows a train of thought. And I think I'm on board with this train ride so far. I hope everybody in the chat is. I have had the privilege of conversations with Christine on and off air in the past. And so if you are confused about any of this, then maybe, I'm taking for granted certain things that I forgot that I know. And so do ask in the chat, as well as I just want to say that, in about a half hour, we're going to open this thing up to Q&A, where we actually bring in those questions that come up over the next half hour in the chat, because Nance, as well as maybe other moderators, they're on the Zoom call with us, but they're also in the live stream chat. That way I don't have to read everything, and neither do you. We can just focus on this conversation. But with all that said, I kind of wanted to draw in a quote that will kind of quilt things, because earlier I had said what people call identity politics, what people call standpoint epistemology, what people call the PMC, like these things that are driving people crazy, are the direct result of a structural change that took place in the 20th century. It started with Taylorism in the professions like engineering, doctors, lawyers, which made sense, but specifically developed into what I call discursive Taylorism. And this, it comes as a response to the successes of labor organizing towards the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, to the point where Woodrow Wilson, who was president of Princeton University in 1909, told the New York City School Teachers Association, we want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, to forego the privileges of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific manual tasks. This is the call for not just the Taylorism over work that eradicates inefficiencies and allows skill monopolization for a subsection of a working class that we call the PMC. No, this is, more importantly, the creation of this idea that everybody has their own lane, and they need to stay in their own lane and follow the enlightened leaders, like you were saying, which is also popular on the left as well with anti-populism today. And I just because I even say those words now, I have to clarify what I mean, because people are so anti-populist that if you have a problem with anti-populism, then people think that you're pro-populist, right? But the point is that since Trump, the liberal progressive elite, they have been blaming the people who get duped by populism, or by the kinds of populists who don't put forward real solutions, blaming those people, or the people who supposedly brainwash them, instead of trying to think, well, might there be a real class antagonism, an objective class antagonism that is being appealed to by populists, and that if the left or whatever, and any movement can't learn how to speak to the disenfranchised, and there's not going to be any solution in the near future, right? The only people who will really want change from every fiber of their being are always going to be the truck drivers, right? Like they're always going to be the people who are looked down on by the left PMC. So does this track for you? And like is this part of the issue for you? Do you consider your anti-liberalism to be a version of populism, or is it something else? How would you describe what your position is in respect to this debate over populism?
Let's put it this way. For the last year, I've been thinking and writing a lot about democracy, and I've been having quite a few arguments. And for me, democracy is a very good example of showing who really are populist, or who really support ordinary people. I mean, working class or poor people, or you can call it the majority. For me, it's the majority. Ask people who will agree with having real democracy. And what I mean by real democracy is that the rule by the people. Imagine the rule by the people, the uneducated, the educated, and most left and right, even if they argue they support democracy, what they are saying is that they support democracy that it is today in the liberal democracy, i.e., in a democracy where most of the people do not have a voice. I mean, you can see that, for example, in France. Those liberal democracy, people do not rule. Putting a cross on the paper every few years, we don't put a cross anymore, but putting a cross on the paper every few years to vote for a representative is not a democracy. It's not a rule by the people. So when you're trying to discuss why is it that you do not want to support the real rule by the people, i.e. the uneducated, imagine the uneducated people, then you can see where in fact, even the populists are not really populists. They are not really supporting ordinary people, because I can't imagine that somehow ordinary people, the cleaner, my background is working class, so the cleaners in some of the family could have a say in how to rule France, or how to rule, because that's what it means. It's the rule by the people. It means that the people have a say in the governance of their own society. And this is very unpopular. And for me, it means that the contents for people, for normal people, for ordinary people, is very strong from left to right. But they will argue that they are populists, they support the working class. But when it comes down to it, they have contents, and they mistrust the people. They mistrust their ability to be able to make a decision for their own world, for their own life. So these are things about, for me, it's not about populism. For me, it's about democracy. That's why I always push this idea of democracy as the rule of the people. And what I like also, it's, what's the name? Ellen Meskin, I put that recently on Facebook, Ellen Meskin Wood, basically showing that the notion of democracy that we use today is not democracy that it was developed in the past, in antiquity. The notion of democracy has been able to be argued and supported because it became, in a way, a safe world. So the separation between the social and economic power and the political power allow the meaning of democracy to change. So it's no longer the rule by the people. And when you say to people, the rule by the people, people will say, how could the cleaner have a say about the nuclear power, for example, in France or in Germany? So they will say, the rule of the people, it's just old democracy. And the notion of democracy today has been changed because of the way that capitalism is organized, where the social and economic power is separated from the political power. And you can talk about introducing people into the political discussion without them having any say and power into controlling the way society is organized. Because at the end of the day, even if you vote every few years, you do not have a say in what's happening to your country or your community.
Right. So if you, for instance, if we lived in a small city-state like Athens and we were free men, because free men were the only ones who had this right, but if we were engaged in democracy in that situation, we're not just talking about who should be representing who and who maybe should be able to take more taxes for what or redistribution or whatever. No, we're also specifically partially going to argue over fundamental transformations of the way we do things that aren't just matters of politics, but what you're saying are economics. At the time, and Hannah Arendt makes this point in The Human Condition, at the time, economics was just allocated to the household, right? This vision of politics between public and private split is eradicated by what she calls socialization, which really what she means is nobody has their own means of subsistence. Nobody has their own economy. Everybody has to rely on a world economy. And so that undermines this public-private split from Athenian society. And I guess for me, then the big question is, like, how does democracy, by and for, of the people, how does that do anything except get in the way of giant transformations of society? Because, and I say it might get in the way, is because, I'm just meeting people I know in my normal life. The things that they want, the things that they advocate for, are not the kinds of grand rescaling of society, right? So it would be more this identity politics, left or right. It would be more arguments over whether we should have bicycles in our cities or not, whether we should have cars in our cities or not. Like, it's not, what about grand restructuring that can actually counter capital? And is democracy really up to the task for such a thing?
There is different things. For example, in a community, for example, in my village, having discussion whether we should have the road done again. For me, it's not politics. It's a discussions about how to, like I said, manage a village and how to live together. Should we have all the houses, the same color, or those kind of things are everyday life necessities, basic needs. This is when I mention democracy, it's about politics in the sense of the directions that the society in general will take. I'm not saying that when people are talking about representation, for me, it's a technical discussion, because they are saying, well, we are living in a big society, so we cannot all, you cannot have 7 billions of people who, put their hands up and said, what about my grandmother? She needs a more, a better car, kind of thing. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that the notion that we can kind of, as a humanity, decide, or as a community, decide the direction of world, it's not happening. Whether you can do it as a representation, nobody said you have to be, a single person have to be in all meetings every day. What I'm saying is that you have a say. When you look at the liberal democracy, every single liberal democracy has in the laws, as laws and regulation that prevent the majority to have a say. And what they are always arguing is that somehow we don't want mob rule. So decided that somehow if the masses has an opinion, they becomes mob rule. The majority will have the wrong opinion. And when we want to have restrictions on the opinions of the majority, that for me shows the content of the ordinary people. And this is put on every single liberal democracy. The word also
Wait, what is put on every label of democracy?
So America is not a democracy; it's a republic. In France, in Britain, Britain's a monarchy, but in France it's supposedly a republic and a democracy. Right. There will be rules and laws that allows the government or the state to stop the majority's point of view to go forward. Today, a few days ago, Macron used a law allowing him to force a law without the political discussions about the law. Yesterday or 2 days ago, these things become law. The pension reform is now law. And then he said, let's move on and let's have a discussion. Let's have discussion about something else. So there is, I don't know all the details of all the different constitutions and all different democracy, but the introductions of democracy is always with this idea that somehow we need to have restrictions or regulations to allow, to stop any ideas of mob rule or mass decision that are going to be in the wrong decision. Death penalty. If you ask most of the people, death penalty will be something that you support. The people will support. But death penalty is has been stopped in quite a few countries. Not because the people don't want it, it's because a minority has decided that the death penalty is not the right thing to do. I'm not supporting death penalty, but what I'm saying is that it's not the majority's decisions anymore, it's somehow the enlightened decision. But more importantly, it's the economic and social power that is always forgotten when you discuss political democracy or formal democracy. The people who has the power to make decisions in this world are the one who have the social and economic power. And that is hidden with the separation between the social, economic, and the political power. So you can have the politicians, but the people behind the politicians, the interests of the capitalists, for example, is not taken, at least is hidden. So the people who has the power to decide what is happening is hidden behind this idea of political democracy. So let's put it this way. When you had the feudal society, the economic was the political, was linked. Today, we have the economic, social, and the political formally. So informally, you have democracy, despite the fact that you don't have democracy in the sense of you don't have the rule by the people, and the economic and social power are hidden. It's not seen as the one who's controlling and directing and governing society. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think the part that you're saying that stuck with me most, as far as like laying to rest my fears, is the too many meetings thing. I think that that's one of the biggest problems of direct democracy, anarchist kind of, syndicate socialism, these various ideas of like, oh, everything's got to be workers' councils for this, a workers' council for that, a group representing this group and a group representing this group, like for this and for that. And it's like, I want to be left alone. I want a politics that leaves me alone. I don't like, I want, people can have their arguments over what a woman is. People can have their arguments over bicycles versus cars. People can have their arguments about all these things. And ultimately, that's a form of political organizing. You wouldn't call it politics in its proper sense, but it's let people need to figure these things out. My thing is that they need to figure those things out locally, and those things should not be, to the best of our ability, not mandated from a centralized governing body that's going to eradicate cultural difference, right? I'm not for a politics that's going to tell Amish people that they have to agree with their definition of the definition of a woman that they have. That's not politics in any sort of a future like sense. There's not a future there. People can have these arguments until the sun swallows us all. But in the meantime, automation is developing really fast. AI is developing really fast. Bioengineering is developing really fast, and we don't have the goods from it. Those are all privatized. And so, like, for me, it's like, I think I really appreciate this. Oh, we wouldn't have to have meetings over everything. Yeah, because it seems like there needs to be a politic, like a big kid politics. Like, put on your big kid clothes. It's real politics. This is about how we're going to deal with like moving into the future, harnessing AI, harnessing automation, and doing drastic measures to change the structural conditions of our life worlds. And instead what we have is bicycles versus cars, veganism versus
that's not politics.
Paleo. Yeah. No, it's not politics, and it's also what Catherine Liu calls virtue hoarding, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. So what I'm trying to say, because people today politics means not anything. I mean, people can have hours of the conversation discussing, like you said, whether I should have the bicycle, everybody should have bicycle, so everybody should have a car. For me, this is not politics. This is or should kids should have fries in their dinner, in their lunch box. I mean, seriously, how could we call that politics? But it is known as politics, and when you hear that, people are, oh my God, who wants to be in politics when you have to have a discussion about what should be in lunchbox of a kid in school? I mean, for me, I don't particularly care. For me, it's not the most important conversation. For me, politics, and that's why I'm talking about democracy. It's not democracy in the sense of every single person should have a point of view on every single person in life. In me having how should somebody in India paint their houses? I mean, who cares? But let's think about I'm involved in politics because I think that we can have a world that is not around capital, irrationality of capital, but around human needs. But most importantly, it's human freedom in the sense of the ability for humanity and individual to develop, to have a possibility for them to be able to become more human. And to become more human is not to have more food, but to be able to develop their mental and moral capacity, doing what they want. This is what I want, somebody's using art or whatever. So to be able to do things that are human. To be able to do that, I cannot not be for democracy as the rule by the people. Because what I'm saying is that I want a world when people are considered people, when they have a control over their own life. It does not mean they have a control over who should paint the house in India. It means that I have control over this and control of what society is building and what society is discussions about human needs, for example. So people have a general control about the direction of their society. The day-to-day can be done. This is bureaucracy. This is management. So the management of society can be done in a lot of different ways. You can discuss management and bureaucracy in a society once it's there. But for me, it's the notion that somehow humanity can together change society in a way that will allow human beings to go further than it is today. Capitalism allow human beings to develop in a certain way. We can talk about identity, about the self. In the self-identity, it's not something that was eternal. It's very historical. What it means to be human beings today in our current capitalist society is very different than it was in the past 2,000 years ago. We have developed the meaning of human being, especially because we go away more and more from nature. We understand natural worlds around us, and we be able to use the natural world around us to, first of all, change the world, but also to change ourselves. So what it means to be human, for me, can be developed and can be developed even further. We don't have to spend 20 hours a day to look for food. This is not a human life. We can now spend 1 hour, 2 hours for food, to looking for basic needs, and the rest think about ideas, art, enjoyment. This is what I mean by developing human beings. So we have further away from the domination of nature. The nature is dominating human beings, but the further away we go from there, and the more we develop socially, the more it becomes a different meaning of humanity. And I'm saying that today in society, that development is restricted by the irrationality of the way it's organized, the irrationality of capital, because it's not about human needs, human development. It's about capital.
That's perfect. That's a perfect tie-in to the quote that I brought up in the conversation with Daniel Tutt earlier, which I'm just going to reread because I'm assuming an audience of people who are not here for the entire conversation. I will be republishing this as a standalone video in the future. But basically, this is a passage from page... actually, let me just double check that this is correct. No, it's not. Yeah, from page 287 of the Penguin edition of the Grundrisse, when Marx he is in part quoting somebody else, but this is like crucial. He says, over the somewhat longer term, specifically during the upward phase of the economic cycle, what we call a boom period, right? He says, however, both wages and profits may show an absolute increase at the same time, and during such periods, the worker may either take the risk of accumulating a small fund of savings for the next crisis, or may broaden the sphere of his consumption to take a small part in higher, even cultural satisfactions. For instance, agitation for his own interests, newspaper subscriptions, attending lectures, educating his children, developing his taste, etc., constituting the worker's only share of civilization which distinguishes him from the slave. This is, for me, like one of the most important elements of the critique of political economy that gets lost so easily, which is like the why do we care part. It's not because I'm a nice person, right? If I was a nice, I can be nice. I can go, give money to charities. I can, hang out and have conversations with homeless people. Look, I can be nice. That doesn't have to be my politics, though. Politics is about us getting things that serve our interests, right? And obviously, universalist politics is like, well, what serves all of our interests? And the point here is, if you want to have a life that is distinguished from that of the slave, then that means that you have the freedom, the time and energy to agitate for your interests, read. Really, it says newspaper subscriptions, but what do those matter if you can't even read? Attending lectures. Where are lectures that you can just attend today? Like Aristotle, Hegel, Lacan. They did public lectures that were not just within the university. They would do devoted lecture courses for paying students, but then they also did public lectures. Where are those today? Sometimes a university might put something on and bring some neoliberal spokesperson to say something, but my thing is that university professors should all be doing public lectures, but they're not, and they don't have freedom of speech. There's been a genocide of voice. There's been a complete breakdown in discourse. Everyone's functionally illiterate and too busy to be able to take advantage of these things if they did exist. And so that's in part the whole point of Theory Underground and what we're trying to do here. I've tried to set up a space where a person listening with earbuds at work, or an ADHD gamer who's multitasking, checking stuff out, is able to, through the algorithm, eventually come to something that's more meat and potatoes, that actually says, no, you have to do the readings yourself. And if you don't have the time and energy and attention span, we need to change the material conditions, because what you desire when you're listening to intellectual content on podcasts is a human desire. It's a desire to do that yourself. Not just to listen to it, but to actually engage in this kind of discourse like we're having here. And so in a moment, I want to turn it over to the Q&A portion, and we'll engage a little bit with the live chat. But before we get into all of that, I just, I think that your project is the most important. I love following the work that you do. I think you get like one like on Twitter sometimes, and it's usually me. Same with Facebook. You get a couple of interactions tops. I think that it is a true sign of the breakdown of discourse and the genocide of voice that, and really the problems of discursive Taylorism, that you aren't being flown out to universities to sit on panels to actually advocate for these positions, and that all you do is underground shit as a result. I just want to say that people in positions of institutional authority need to remedy the situation. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to your future work. I understand. I think you're writing something for Underground Theory Volume 1. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And perfect. I think all of this is kind of on a trajectory towards your work that is on the way. So I think everyone should read your work, Transcending Racial Divisions, which is a fundamental critique of racial thinking, and it goes really into the history and development of racial thinking. But I know that you kind of you're like me with my first book. I don't know about this. I got to get something new out there. So for now, I just hope that everyone will like watch everything that you've done and engage with your work. And yeah, just thank you for coming on.
Thank you for asking me to be here. So I always enjoy discussing with you, because we don't have. I mean, I agree with some of your things and you agree with me, but we don't have like the completely similar. So it's kind of stimulating. Yeah, you make me talk, and I talk and talk and talk.
You say simulating or stimulating?
You are discussing with you is stimulating.
Oh, stimulating.
We don't have completely similar point of view, and so right. your conversation stimulates me. It makes me kind of think of why you're saying that, and why is it that I'm not exactly completely 100%. So it's kind of stimulating conversation. And that's Wonderful. What I think is important, is to be stimulating intellectually. And that's what you're talking about. For me, the fact that we have human knowledge, and most of the people cannot have access to human knowledge. That's, for me, is one of the... Because when I was a kid, this idea is to be able to... I had this idea that, God is not God. I was brought up as a Catholic, yeah? So God could exist and could be nice to if he's exists or not. For me, it wasn't important for me, because for me, God will be, when I die, I have all knowledge of the world. For me, death would be nice if I had all knowledge. So for me, human knowledge, a knowledge of the world, understanding the universe, understanding it is the most important things that for human beings. And the fact that even today, when we have all this technology, most of the people do not have access to the small, because we human beings are far from understanding the world, completely the world. But even the small amount of human knowledge that we have, most people do not have access to it. And for me, it's just sad. That's what pushes me to carry on in politics and to carry on. But I'm not the only one who's isolated. There's a lot of people. For me, the pessimistic climate that we have today, prevents people to think that. Even my friends and my family, I would say, we can do something better. Oh no, maybe we could have more taxes so we can have better education. And then think big.
Yeah.
Let's think bigger.
Yeah, way bigger. Jeez.
Yeah.
So I guess I had originally titled this talk, if I'm looking at the poster here, Identity Politics Left and Right. And I think I remember you saying something in a post one time where you were saying something like something, right-wing identity politics, this and that. And I was thinking, does she just mean like people who organize on the basis of white supremacy? Like, is she talking about neo-fascists, or is she talking about something else? And so I reached out and I asked, and you clarified it, and I found it enlightening. And so as we switch over into a sort of Q&A session here, Nance, I don't know if you're still in the chat, but we're about ready for it. My big question then, as a way of kind of quilting this whole conversation so far into one nice piece, maybe, is what does this mean? Identity politics left and right. What is right-wing identity politics to you?
I think the title was Identity Politics is Right-wing. I didn't choose the title. That was my first talk with Dr. Slane when the book went out. And so he invited me to interview me, basically. And the title of that thing was Identity Politics is Right-wing. And what actually, it's a little bit too short a way of understanding, is that what I mean is that the birth of identity politics, the identity politics start from right-wing reactionary. So it's a reactionary right-wing politics that started, in fact, pretty much after the Enlightenment. And the first identity politics is race. So people have decided that identity politics, I suppose for some people, it is very important to push this idea that identity politics is only left, because then you can just say, I'm against identity politics. And then you have some people say, I'm against identity politics. But I think that the British should have a special value, and we need to be able to, if you are British, you have to have a certain value. And that's, for me, it's identity politics. You're using national identity, but you're still doing identity politics around the national identity. Or you're doing politics around sexual identity, or you're doing identity politics around gender identity, but it's still identity politics. So for me, identity politics started first with race, and this idea that somehow your racial identity is telling you what your moral and mental and politics should be. So identities is in the box, and that is determine your political opinions, the morality, your social position, race, and then you have gender and sexual and political. Political is a bit special, because political identity could be identity or could be not identity, depending on how you say it. But you could be a socialist as an identity, a socialist as having a particular point of view. But today, everything is around identity. So even things like working class, you could understand it in a Marxist way, as understanding is a relationship of productions, in relationship, in relation to the means of productions.
Right.
Or you could understand working class as a groups of people with a certain culture, certain value, certain way of life. That is working class as identity. And today, a lot of the people who discuss working class are discussing working class identity. That's also the reason why you will also hear me discussing class politics is also becoming, or it has become, identity politics. Just using class instead of race, or instead of sex, sexual instead of gender. So identity politics started with race. This is rationally right. But when the left, the social movements of the ordinary people basically got destroyed, the left decided or started to use identity politics for themselves. So the left, or the radical identity politics today, is a new phenomenon. Because, for example, anti-racism, there was a lot of people who were anti-racist, but with this notion that you had to change society to be able to challenge racism. The radical anti-racism. Of course, you had the radical anti-racism, the anti-racism, who argued that the black should be separated from the white because we are special and whatever. But you had the notions of anti-racism as you had to stop racism by changing society. That all this politics of all this universalist politics, I call it universalist politics, this notion that we as human beings build together a better society, is gone. So left moved into this identity politics, fight for black, fight for women, fight for trans, fight for British, fight for immigrants. And so they're using identity, social position, and then fight for the interests of this particular group. Interests of the migrants, interests of the British, interests of the woman, trans, black. This is very divisive. And he has absolutely no notions.
Excellent, but I also think that there's another answer you've given to the question that cut to me in a way that I was like, oh my God, because I just don't normally think about it this way. Because yeah, people talk about like right-wing identity politics also being like white supremacy or whatever, but like the amazing thing that you said when I asked you that question was patriotism.
Yes.
Patriotism hit me like different because, I come from a family where my parents are very patriotic. They're immigrants, and so their citizenship is a very big deal to them. And, I have some sympathies there that go beyond the average progressive standpoint, that's for sure. But to think of that as identity politics was powerful because it's true. It instantly changed how I thought about it. I was like, wow, yeah, they advocate for for everyone has to stand and put their hand over their heart and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, that's not freedom of speech. They advocate for, they're against Colin Kaepernick taking the knee, and it's like, what, they thought that that's not his freedom. And this sense of patriotism that places the national identity over almost everything else besides God and family, of course. Yeah, that's identity politics, and it's a form of identity politics that every candidate running for president plays. They always play this, I'm the real American. Check out my story. I've got a story that tells you what it is to be a real American. And they're all arguing over what it is to be a real American, but if they don't argue that, if they don't have a strong sense of identity based around something in reference to that, they're not going to win. And I was like, oh my God. So that's been a sort of slow detonating realization for me since you initially brought it up.
For me, identity politics, the way I define it, identity politics is using different type of social identities. And what I mean by social is this identities that it is in our social world. So political identity or national identity are also social identity. Lifestyle identity, I call it also social identity. And so the use of social identity in politics. And I know that some people say, oh, but if you're saying that, then you don't make any difference between left and right. But that's the point, is that some people want to make a difference between left and right and can argue that, yeah, I have people telling me black identity is crap. But I support women's identity. I have no problem fighting for women's identity, what it means to be a woman, and women can talk only about women. Only women can talk about women's issue. I mean, this is stay in your lane. You have the stay in your lane of black identity, and somehow I should be against black identity because this is not good. Because if you're supporting black identity, you're against white. This is this anti-white. I'm being called racist simply because I'm against identity. So a black identity, if I'm a good black, I should be against it on the level of the the people calling themselves anti-woke. They will say, if I'm against black identity, I'm a good black. But if I challenge a woman's identity or national identity, so British, French, American, then I'm a bad black.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them are the same. They are using an identity, a very specific identity, and an identity that becomes very fixed. And they're using this identity to fight for the interests of this particular identity group. What it means to be a real black, what it means to be a real British, what it means to be a real woman, what it means to be a real trans, what it means to be a real professor, what it means to be a real vegan. And then when you basically define those identities, then who can have the interest and who can fight for the interest of the real vegan, and who can fight the interest of the real British, who can define it and who can fight for it and who can get the benefits of being a real British. And when you start talking about real British, it also means that the people who have the membership of being British may lose it, because if they have the wrong point of view or the wrong way of life, then they are not British anymore, or they are not black, or they're not women, or they're not,
Right.
All of them are the same. So you have identity politics from left and right. And for me, in the beginning, I started to be supposedly only anti-woke. And I realized that identity politics, in fact, this is when I discussed race, I realized that identity politics are coming from both the left and right. It started with race on the right, but identity politics are left and right. And that even those who argue against identity politics are in fact arguing against the identity politics that they do not support, while promoting identity politics in the identities they support. So people will be against black identity, but they will support white identity. That is the racist. White identity in the sense of, we don't want the Britain or
here.
America to become too white, non-white, because this is a very racist things, because you're looking at race only. So they will support one identity, and for some people it is very important for them to say, "Oh, I'm not doing identity politics." But when you analyze it, yes, they are doing identity politics, and they have the same inherent things: define identity, stay in your lane, and fighting the interests of these particular groups. And like I said, I'm into. I think the important things for anybody who's left is to develop universalist politics, not in the sense that we all live together, but in notion that identity should not matter to create a world, a better world. That I can be solidar to somebody who is Chinese, gay, who never doesn't speak French or English. I can still have solidarity with them, and I can still have a common purpose with them. And I don't have to have the shared identities to be able to have solidarity with those groups of people, because it's about the aim, political aim, that is important, not our identities.
And so I want to, like, I guess I was going to turn it over to Q&A, but I still have my own questions that I got to get in here. And for the people who've never met you before, who've never heard from you before, who've never read anything you've written, I wanted to touch on something related to your identity that maybe they don't know about. You were talking about your PhD days. Yeah, you left out the fact that you have two, though. And it's so funny because you brought up you realize, well, God must be absolute knowledge, must be knowing everything. And so, that would be being God. Well, and then I was going to make a joke, like, of course, that's why you have two PhDs. That's what you aspired to, right? And one of those is in biology. The other one is in the humanities. But then you also have this background as having been a communist activist for a long time. And then you currently live near Freiburg, Germany, where we met last November, and we went on a double date with our significant others. But you have a distinct French accent, and yet you've also lived in the United States for at least 7 years, which was where you got your taste for how banana bread all of this politics stuff is today. And so I wanted to kind of just ask you, the quintessential PMC standpoint epistemology question about your experience being a French person in America for 7 years versus your experience of being a French person in Germany for as long as you've been in Germany, or in England. Yeah, how long were you there?
13 years. I lived in England.
And you've been in Germany how long?
More than 13 years. No. Yeah. I mean, I lived more. I spent more of my life outside. Only my childhood, basically. I left France when I was 20, something like 20, 21. And I'm not going to give my age, I'm a woman. I'm joking, but I spent more of my life. I mean, you can calculate. I'm over 50. So I spent most of my life abroad. Than in France. So France is my country of youth and childhood, and then Britain 13 years, America 6-7 years, and Germany since 2008. So calculate. I'm too excited to calculate.
12, like, is that 13, 14, something?
14, yeah, something like 14 years. So I know that I have already calculated that I am longer in Germany than any other places. What's the difference being in France, in America, in Germany? I mean, this is life experience, personal experience, and it really depends of your stage in your life. I mean, I could say that in my life today, I enjoy the most Germany. But that's because I'm happily married, and I have my dog, and I have my house, and I'm doing things that I enjoy. So thinking of ideas, researching ideas. I mean, there is a lot of it which is very personal. So as a French, I mean, the reason also because I left America. I didn't want to leave America. I left America because of the work in science. I was a scientist at the time, and when you're a scientist as a French, you need to have a visa. So if you don't have a job, you have to leave America after you. And then 6 years, you have 3 years and 3 years visa, and after that you have to. So it was just a visa question. So as a foreigner, so I live as a foreigner in a different country, and I mean, I don't know what you're asking me. A different time. What? I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. For instance, like, what is the difference between you felt when you were in the United States, I think I remember you saying, this pressure to speak from the standpoint of a black woman. You felt like this pressure put on you in political spheres, and you didn't like that. You didn't like it, and that's part of the reason you wanted to focus on the hard sciences at the time. And you were a communist, so you just had a bad taste with this liberal approach. Is that correct, first of all?
No, it's more like it's too early. So the pressure as black was both in England, in America,
Okay.
and actually this is how I started with my book. I started with my book because, in a way, I was thinking that things are getting worse because, as in France, England, in America, there was a pressure of you're black. And so you have to have a certain way of thinking, and and you couldn't talk about racism. I mean, when I was in England, in America, there was no way I would have talked about racism in my science work, because I know that I would be known as a troublemaker. Things have changed. First of all, because this issue of you being black with a certain point of view also come from the not only from the right but from the left. So the left is also that I reacted to it. I started the book because I reacted to decided that somehow people care about me so much that they're telling me what I should think. So it came not only from the racist but also the non-racist, the anti-racist, asking me, putting me in a box basically. So this pressure of being a black person, of being always define myself as a black person, came from different time, from different people. So in England, in France, more racist. In America, I was more of living in international settings, because in science, and there was when you work as a postdoc in science in America, at least in California, most of the postdocs are foreigners. So you will have Chinese, Russian, European, all type of different European, Latin American, African. So the settings for as a postdoc in science was more international. So that was discussion was a little bit different in Germany. Then becomes more of a setting of, as a black, that you should support black identity and that kind of thing. So it becomes, there is a relationship between what's happening politically. But what you're talking about America is when I started discussing black politics or anti-racism online with a lot of Americans, I've been insulted a lot because I was challenging black identity and blackness. And
You've been insulted a
yeah.
lot. You've been insulted a lot because of you challenge it.
Well, when you are involved in identity, when you're involved in identity politics, so at least when you challenge identity politics, if you challenge these notions that you support, you shouldn't support an identity, you're going to be insulted. So the censorship or the free speech discussion where people are saying, well, the trans are becoming very anti-free speech and that kind of thing, it's happening in any other identity politics, because identity politics is about stay in your lane. So if I, as a black person, challenge black identity, or this notion that somehow all blacks have the same opinion, I'm going to be insulted. If I do it as a woman, which at the moment have been, are you insulted? Because how can you just say that woman trans? Because I disagree with this. I think I disagree with this idea that trans cannot be a woman. So if you disagree with that, how can you not think that women should be just about reproductive sex, biological sex? Then you're also insulted. If I challenge the French because it's also supposedly my identity, then I will be insulted. This is something that you have when you're involved in identity, because you're challenging what supposedly the most important things that we should support, identities. that somehow we have to look at the world through identities, and if you challenge them, then you're basically offending groups of people. Those insults and those attacks are coming from different. And given that I'm quite happy to challenge both the left and the right on that. Then I will be receiving attacks from both the left and the right.
For sure,
Black,
and you are challenging patriotism at the same time that you're challenging the idea that the definition of woman should be based on biology, right? And so that puts you in the you don't belong anywhere camp, right? Like that, which is good. This is a place for people who don't belong anywhere, and you don't belong here either. Nobody belongs anywhere in this world, and I'm not going to sell people the illusion that they belong anywhere. But your position, your stuff that you say about trans activism today is really interesting. And we just had on Daniel Tutt, and then Nina Power was able to join partway through that conversation. That was not planned. She was originally going to be on for a previous section, but she was held up. And so, are you familiar with Nina Power? Yeah. And so she's basically come out pretty strongly against trans activism in the 21st. I mean, I guess I could say 21st century, really just like in the last 5 years, like the sort of boiling point it's reached. Because, I mean, for a lot of us, like we were like, yeah, of course, trans people should be able to use whatever bathrooms they want. Yeah, of course, people should be able to X, Y, and Z. And then eventually it gets to this point where it's like people start falling off at various points with the activism. And your point about the activism is that that's the activism. That's not the definition of women. That's the issue, is that people are arguing over definitions, a gatekeeper function for this discursive Taylorism, for this stay in your lane shit. And so like the argument between anti-TERF and TERF like debates is ultimately just more identity politics, even on the side of the. And so for you, yeah, it sounds like you still stick your neck out into this complicated area, and you have your positions, but you also are kind of against. What is your position? I guess I should really just ask you to kind of expand on your position related to all of this, because I've had the benefit of seeing some of the stuff you've posted. Nobody in the chat is in that position, and so maybe you could just differentiate yourself from this sort of Daniel Tutt's position being he won't post a conversation had with Nina Power because the trans community wouldn't, he listens to the trans community and the trans community says, don't do that. As opposed to Nina Power's position, which is, no, I might disagree with like the definition of a woman, but I have the right to speak and I should be able to have my voice heard. What is your position today vis-a-vis all of this discourse?
My position, first, I really get annoyed with these notions that people are trying to say that somehow there is some identity groups that are going to be more into censorship than others. I think my position, if I challenge this idea that woman is just adult female, I am being shut up too. So the trans can be as violent, the trans activist can be as violent as a feminist activist. Because when you're involved in politics, this is a vicious thing. Involving identity politics is about fighting for the interest, political interest, social interest, and economic interest. Those fights are going to be very vicious. So the viciousness is turned into censorship. So the violence, shut up, stay in your lane, you find it in every single identity politics. My point with trans and feminists is that the discussion itself, for me, it doesn't interest me. Because, the discussions on how to define women, in a way, it's identity politics. So two identity groups fighting to decide what is the meaning of woman. And for me, as a person who interested in challenging or socially transforming capitalism, the discussions about identity and the definitions of an identity, it's not useful. Not only that, but involve myself in identity politics goes against this notion of universalism.
Right.
But at the same time, because for me, identity does not matter to be able to together as the interests of different human beings, so as not human beings as biology, but social beings, together, our interest is to be able to challenge the society that it is today, to oppose it and to change it. So I don't care whether you're a Black or Jews, Muslim, lesbian. It's the common interest that is important to change society that where workers, because this is what it means, the most of us don't own the means of production. So I want to change that. So the fight between two identity groups doesn't interest me. At the same time, yes, I did get involved in it because what I also found, I don't support the trans activists in the sense of, you decide what you want and then you can be a woman and you can be doing that, because you're right, there is things called biological sex. But I also challenge this very, for me, loud voice, because as a woman, I hear a lot of the woman's voice, loud voice saying women are basically, it's all about biological sex and women are just adult female. Because basically you are saying that the definition of a woman, the meaning of woman, is biology. And for me, that is very much going backwards. Because social categories are social categories. They're not biological categories. They are categories that are, not fixed. I was going to say they're not trans-historical. They're not ahistorical.
Right.
They are historical. They're socially and historically specific.
Right.
And the notions of women has changed and will change. So I have no problems saying that a trans can be a woman, because the notions of what it means to be a woman has changed. And it's not necessarily on the, do you have the right organs, so then you'll be a woman, because that's what the feminists at the moment are pushing, adult female. Somehow, our social category should be related to biology. Biological sex saying male, female, so woman means having the right, having the vagina, and male having the, can you say penis, online?
Yeah.
I found it a little bit of but anyway, you have to have the right, and this is very anti-human. To define human beings through their biology is very anti-human. So I'm reacting to the woman at the moment quite a lot on Facebook, because I found it, even if I support the woman's equality. So I support the right for abortion, for example. I think women should have the right for abortion. So those kind of things. I support the women to have education, equal right, basically. I support that. But to start to challenge the trans by arguing that women are all about biology, I think it's very conservative politics. And this is very damaging, because you're basically trying to define human beings, or men and women, with biology. And human beings are more than biological bodies.
Right.
If I believe biological, then what's the point of changing society if we are just animals?
Right. I think that there's a couple of sort of devil's advocate ideas that I would love to hear you kind of expand on related to this. I would love to have host a conversation between yourself and Nina, between yourself and Swole, Eamon, who engaged with you on Facebook about this very topic. I hope Anne is going to be able to pop in here and ask a question related to all of this. But the fact is this is a can of worms. It could potentially go in every direction. It could take a long time to bring it back around. And I have to just bring it back around right now to say Q&A time. Nance, are you here? Let's see if the chat has shared out. Nance, would you like to introduce yourself to Christine and then mediate? I'll be right back. Going to run to the restroom, but I can hear on my headphones. So
awesome. Hello, it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I saw you, I think a year-ish ago on This Is Revolution podcast, and I've been a super fan since.
Oh, okay. I'm give all red now.
Me too.
I hope not to disappoint you.
There was a question when you said like local management, local council meetings, and how that's management rather than government. Just to kind of drive that home, the difference between management and government. Does that rest on the fact that like we're bought into this myth of like the individual, and our preferences and opinions matter in a political sense, and politics that deal with the big existential issues has kind of fallen by the wayside because we're focused on interpersonal social games?
Yes, because I think I can't remember where I read it somewhere. Somebody, I can't remember. I mean, I read ideas and I don't remember. I'm not very good at remembering names. But someone was saying that you cannot think of politics without philosophy. And that's the problems with politics today, is that people think that you have philosophy and then you have politics. And so that's the reason why you can have politics management seen as politics, because you're basically saying that you don't think about the underlying meaning of humanity, underlying meaning of the future and the world, because that's what politics is about. It's supposedly about. It's about what it means to be human. Also, how can we have a better world? How can we build our future? There is always a lot of big questions, philosophical questions, and your philosophical assumption beyond your political positions are very much there. Today, when you discuss should we have higher taxes or not higher taxes, there is no philosophy beyond it. I mean, yes, there is some philosophy, but it's not a philosophical questions. And so it's become very much of a management. Should we have 1% or 2%? I mean, this is, for me, it's so boring, very technical. I mean, I used to be a scientist, but come on, give me a break with these kind of technical things that and then you calculate. Some people like technology, but philosophical discussions are the most important because they are the basis of political discussions, and that is gone. And I think it's gone because we are, as individuals, we have lost the notions that we can do more. I think it's based on the pessimistic climate that individuals cannot do anything about the world. So they're going to the reductions in the views. I mean, when I encounter it all the time, when I try to say to people, just think about what we could do. I mean, how can we change? I mean, except the people who are into science fiction. So if you're I love science fiction myself. If you're into science fiction, you imagine the world. But when you talk people to about the reality, that the view is becoming, yes, but should we have more cars? Because there is millions of cars. I mean, like, think about further than the number of cars on the planet. Think about what humanity should be doing in the future about planet, or the Greens are not too bad in a sense, because some of them are very much into the future, others are very much into the technique, but others have a visions. And this is, I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, I think for me it kind of does rest on that, I guess, like a kind of solipsism where I'm powerless, and so I'm going to pretend that I have all this power to control meaningless preferences. I want less sugar in my kids' drinks, but I also, like, I really don't want my kids to be shot, but I'm going to focus on nutrition in their school lunches.
Food fascism. I'm kidding. Is there anything else that we really want to bring in at this point, or is this a good point to? I think we are just about ready to close out here because we got to get ready for Chris Catrone, and so unless there was something pressing from the chat that we absolutely must bring in now, I would like to say I think that there's a lot of rich potential for further dialogue here. Christine, I really look forward to what you're writing, and that I'm excited that you're going to be one of the voices engaged in this ongoing conversation here. And it really means the world to me that you were able to make the time on the launch event. And so thank you for being here. Is there anything you would like to say in close?
when you're having these open things, to me, it's harder than if you have a specific question. Thank you for inviting me, and I love to do the conversation, and I have more ideas. And it's too your question is too open. What do you want to say? I love to carry on and discuss.
How about this? Since this is not a journalism underground platform, which is pretty much all that we have from in Renegade Media today is journalism shit. No, this is academic, and so in a sense, it's a theory based thing. And so what I would like is maybe if you just said, okay, so for anybody who's really curious in where you're coming from, but wants to come to their own conclusions. If you were teaching a course on this topic, or if you were just recommending them some top books to study thoroughly, what's a little syllabus, the first draft of a little syllabus off the top of your head, like 3 to 5 major works you think that everybody who's going to be a part of this conversation, you really wish that they would read these books? What would those be?
I mean, I have some author that I really like, but it's more because of my political position. First of all, I wanted to mention one of the things. I mean, I really like what you're doing because, and I agree with you with this philosophical and academic things, because one of the things that I love philosophy. And for me, philosophy has always been, when I was a kid, I wanted to do philosophy, but, as a working class, especially a black working class woman, there's no way I could have done philosophy because it's like, how are you going to earn your living by doing philosophy? Right. It's not as if you're going to become a professor, Christine, And so then I wanted to become a doctor and to work in the world, third world. That's what I wanted to do, to be a doctor in the third world. But philosophy, for me, it's the important questions, and it's not the way that people see philosophy. The people always see philosophy as if like empty questions that goes nowhere.
Right.
And I always try to say to my people around me, philosophy is about the big questions. It's about the important questions about our lives. This is the underlying way of understanding the world. It is because I have certain philosophical position that I support one thing and not the others. And so we do have philosophical assumptions, but if we don't think about them, then we just kind of reducing our mind and we go all over the place, or we are in the wrong, we don't think about position. So I was saying philosophy is very important and should be done by everybody, because at the end of the day, this is life, this is human life. And important books, I mean, we talk about Kenan Malik as on the issue of race. I like very much, when it comes to politics, Ellen Meskenwood. I like her very much. You're talking about philosophy as philosopher like Kant and Hume or something like that, or anybody? I like, what's his name?
Well,
what's his name?
Specifically, yeah, on this identity politics, racial thinking, line of thought, specifically, Kevin Malik is the first reference.
Kenan.
Kenan.
K-A-N-A-N. It's my French
Kenan.
accent.
Oh, okay. Kenan.
Malik.
Kenan Malik.
Malik.
Yeah, is there, so what would be the next 2 books to read with him? Yeah.
And also the Racecraft is also very good, huh? It's a bit older. The Racecraft from Karen and Barbara Fields, the 2 sisters. I saw a talk, old talk 10 years ago. The point was the point she was making, and Kenan is saying, racism created race. It's not race created racism, but racism created race. This is one of the most important points, and this is also a very opposing point of view to all the liberal discussions on race. It is because people needed to have explanations for the inequality in a world where equality is supposed to have happened, that race becomes racism was the discrimination between different groups. And then you have to explain why there is a difference between different groups, and you use race as an explanation. So if you have all blacks enslaved, you have to use the notion of race. So it's because they are black, they are slave, for example, or because they're inferior. But it's because you had already the discrimination or the positions of the black people. And so you have racism first, and then you have race.
There's also, and I think you even reference this text in your book, the invention of the white race, the policies that racialized slavery and gave different. Before slavery, as racialized, everyone was just an indentured servant. Everyone had a track to freedom. After Bacon's rebellion, as a way of dividing the working class that had worked together, they rolled out the white people can get their freedom faster than mulattoes, and black people never get it. And I think you actually say in your book that you don't like this language of invention.
No.
But at the same time, though, you can see how that's self-serving for the ruling class to lean into racism and to racialize slavery, and that is it historically does come after Bacon's Rebellion, which was a mass black and white collaboration.
Yeah, but the reason I don't like the invention is the invention word is because invention has this kind of conscious things that, like, groups of people sit down and say, "Oh, let's invent race." This does not happen.
Okay.
I very much agree with Kennan and Fields and others. What's his name? Michael. Anyway, he will come back. There is also two American who are very good. I was trying to hurry. Yes, invention is as if it was like you thinking and you're developing, but it's because you have Enlightenment discussions was about equality. Of course, we know that there was no equality, but there is this notion that we can be equal. And then you didn't have equality because the development of capitalism created new inequality. And how do you explain new inequality? How do you explain that a working class were poor, very poor, living in bad conditions, and black were slave? How do you explain that? So you have to look at inequality as natural and permanent. So if they are not challenged by the new capitalist society, it means that they must be kind of permanent, or there is an explanation permanent. And then so the notions of racism, so this discrimination between different groups of people, is become notions of race, a natural and permanent division between different groups of people. This is how. So it's developed amongst the intellectuals, but it's not somebody said, "Oh, let's go and develop the notion of race so that we'll explain." It's an intellectual development in relation to what's happening socially. How do you explain inequality in a society that supposedly everybody was equal?
That's perfect. And I guess we have to call it off now. So thank you so much for joining. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your night there in Germany.
And thank you very much for inviting me, and I enjoy it. And talk to you soon, hopefully.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And now a quick message from our sponsors. Just kidding. This will be neither quick nor from any corporate or state sponsorship. What follows is a description of Theory Underground, a thank you to its patrons, information about the upcoming tour, and 3 brand new courses that you might want to enroll in. Stay for the whole thing to get promo codes to save on those courses or information about the financial aid scholarship.
Theory Underground is a philosophy lecture course gated social media site and publishing house by and for working class intellectuals and renegade academics. The subject matters dealt with at Theory Underground are the most important, yet neglected for understanding ourselves, the world, and ways of possibly changing it.
Because we have no corporate or state sponsors, only a small band of patrons, everything in this first year of operation helps immensely. Special thank yous to Bert, Nance, Marilyn, Carl, and Adam for your help in the $50 per month patron tier. If you want to help but the $50 tier is too much, consider donating towards meals and gasoline via Venmo or PayPal.
The gasoline is for our countrywide tour of the US, where we aim to meet with supporters of this effort and do events to draw in new people who do not necessarily belong to marketing demographics predetermined by the attention economy. We will be giving lectures, leading discussions, and promoting several brand new books. Our goal is to only go to towns and cities where we have personal invitations from at least one person. We are doing this underground style, which for the hardcore punk scene in the US meant coming for long enough to get to know the area and do multiple events, not this modern treadmill of a new city each night in an attempt to maximize fame and profit. If you are interested in being a host, guide, or volunteer, then please fill out the form at https://theory-underground.com/US-tour-2023. In an attempt to utilize the resources made publicly available, we will be using libraries for most of our events. So if you have a local library card and can reserve a space for us, we would most appreciate it. Alternatively, some of you might have access to pretty epic venue spaces. Just let us know ahead of time.
Now for the courses. The 3 upcoming courses are What is Sex?, Digital Literacy and CMT, Critical Media Theory, and Being and Time. All courses at Theory Underground are available after the fact on demand, but some people get a lot more out of doing it live with a cohort.
If you are looking to think deeply about the devices we have become reliant on while experimenting with new ways of reclaiming your attention span and relationship with yourself and others, then check out Digital Literacy and Critical Media Theory, a course that is structured to combat the attention economy while strategically using some of its tools to help us gain a freer relationship to our devices. If interested, an introduction to this course will be shared at the end of this video. Just make sure to click on it. The lectures for this course take place on the second Sunday of every month for 6 months, starting in May. If you sign up at Tier 3, you also get access to the Recovery Group component, which also meets once per month. Enroll with promo code CMTEarlyBirdYT before May 13th for 20% off.
If you are frustrated by the discourse revolving around gender ideology, left and right, then join us in thinking deeper about sex. Cadell Last of Philosophy Portal is joining up with Theory Underground to teach Alenka Zupančik's What is Sex?, one of the most succinct and cutting-edge works of theory dealing with the topic. Zupančik is one of the Slovenian circle's most incisive critics of both naive progressivism and reactionary tendencies when it comes to thinking about the relationship between sex, culture, and subjectivity. If interested, watch 3 Reasons to Read What is Sex, which will be shared on screen at the end of this video. What is Sex begins in May and goes through June, meeting for 4 lecture sessions, and, surprise, you will actually get to meet Alenka Zupančik herself. Use promo code WHATISSEXEARLYBIRDYT before May 7th for 20% off.
And just so you know, everybody, don't stress the capitalization. I just make it that way so it's more readable. It's not case sensitive. Being in Time is one of the most notorious, profound, and difficult works of philosophy from the last 200 years. Its deconstruction of modernity and fundamental challenge to scientism is a prerequisite rite of passage for any thinker who wants to seriously engage with continental philosophy, social theory, or world change. In this course, you will learn about what Heidegger means by being in the world, Dasein, being unto death, and so many other crucial developments. But more important than all these buzzwords is just taking on this work itself and wrestling with the text. Doing so will rapidly accelerate your reading comprehension abilities and simultaneously challenge some of your most deep-seated presuppositions. As before, an introductory video to this course is shared on the end screen of this video, or can be accessed from the links in the description. Being in Time Division 1 starts in June and ends July 22nd. Division 2 begins August 19th and goes through October. To sign up for Division 1 today, use the promo code BEINGINTIMEEarlybirdYT before the end of May for 20% off.
If you feel obstructed by the cost of these courses, then we have good news. But before getting into the financial aid info, why are there even price tags at all? much less tiered pricing. First, because some people just want to audit, whereas others want constructive critical feedback or even one-on-one sessions. The tiers exist so that you can get the value you are seeking while compensating me, Dave, fairly for the time and energy required.
Second, the prices set for these courses aim to make Theory Underground sustainable, meaning that it will bring in enough to pay for the costs of the operation, including my personal bills, since I want to be a co-earner in the household when my soon-to-be wife and I start a family.
Thirdly, people tend to take the things they pay for more seriously, and we want you to get the most out of this experience.
With those reasons aside, we do not seek to exclude anyone who is struggling just to get by. We have a financial aid scholarship option for people who are currently between jobs or who live in a country on a cheap currency, like many of you who watch from Thailand, India, Mexico, or Poland, to name a few of the residents of some of the people who have already received financial aid scholarships in the last couple of months. Because I know what trying to study theory under the stresses of housing insecurity and poverty is like, the scholarship was set up during the first month of operation. Simply fill it out at https://theory-underground.com/scholarship.
Last but not least, stay tuned for the Theory Underground app, coming soon to an app store near you, on your phone.
Yeah, and seriously, thank you for listening or watching to this point, and yeah,
Thanks.
we look forward to taking these courses with you.
Bye.